an opportunity here to provide leadership, support, and a voice to the voiceless. The sacrifices that we made during our service do not end here. We carry on. We push forward, and we give hope and inspiration through love, community, and support. Stay free.
Rights and freedoms in this country are absolutely everything to me, because I personally know the sacrifice required in order to get them back once they're gone. So when my brothers and sisters call stand 2, be sure I'll be there.
Legacy media will play their games, right? Like, this isn't about this or that. This is about freedom, period.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Brothers and sisters in uniform, whether you're a police officer, military, check your hearts. Look where we're going. Man, wake up. I beg you.
If the veterans can't stand up and get a message across to the government, I don't know who can. I don't know. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think we have a chance to win this and do it. But we need your help. And we need you to come, and we need you to stand too. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Got a sunburn to peel the daggers off your tongue. Young and dumb, I'm rotting like a bed sore in a cold case that's never gonna be more than scratching at the walls while you're waiting for a bullet to come. All along I've been treading in the deep end, throw my mirror in the cupboard for the weekend. Try and put together pieces while I'm dreaming, but nothing's adding up to a thing but a hole in the head. markets, yes, they rob. I'm sold out to the merchant shelves. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. My head was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Evely, the magnanimous Gen Xer male, I'm back with you now on this 6th day of February 2024. We got a great show lined up with you today. I got a couple of guests who are actually having some technical difficulties joining. Surprise, surprise. That would be the way, but we're going to power through this like we always do. Yeah, I am in Sydney, Nova Scotia, so I have just seen more snow than I have ever seen in my entire life in the last few days. I have been out there every single day, digging probably a whole season's worth of snow by the day. It's just been unbelievable. But all good here on the homestead. I still have access to power and all that stuff, so I'm doing just fine. Just a little sore pushing all that snow around for days on end. Lots of stretching going on here. Probably not as many push-ups as usual. But I'll go ahead and say my good mornings before we dive right into this. Actually, it's not morning where I am, but it's probably morning where a lot of you are. Let's see. Alpha of the Betas was the first one on the board this this morning, says, giving us the salute, and Philip the Goat. Awesome. And we had a bunch of people over here on Rumble as well that were very early in the game. Canada Veritas says, if you ain't first, you're last, and give us the triple slashy right back at you, bro. And Can Be Dread is saying, seeing that footage made me cry every single time. And I believe that's in reference to the video that's on loop on the Rumble channel just before I go live. And that's from the convoy and a lot of the thuggery that took place there with OPS and the OPP and RCMP and all of those well-dressed bands of thugs who showed up to beat us all up and leave us out in the freezing cold. Let's see, Survivalist is giving it the triple slashy. So is Rob K. Firebot as well. Slabtown Gal, triple slashy. FD, Shockwave, and Tivor. Chris W. Burke is doing the same. Jason James, same. And Shiloh says, let's go. Going to be a great episode. Yes, I certainly hope so, guys. It's such an important subject with respect to what's going on in Canada and the fight for freedom these days. Mother of the Drummers on YouTube says, afternoon, Jeff. Thanks for the updates last week on X, shared on X. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I did. So I attended the hearing for Jeremy MacKenzie and Morgan Guptill there last week. I know Jeremy's the only one in the title, but I should mention that Morgan is also being persecuted. And the hearing itself was a motion to dismiss on grounds of abuse of process. So just so we're clear on that, it's not the trial. I actually thought I was going up for the trial initially, but as the day progressed, I realized that wasn't the case. So yeah, that is the hope, that they can get the charges dismissed without going to trial just based on the evidence of abuse process. We'll see how it goes and definitely keep you updated. Lynn is giving us the triple slashy, and Rhea says, cheers, everyone, giving us the triple slashy. And Patricia is here as always, says, good afternoon, giving us the hearts. Darlene is with us as always, saying, good afternoon, everyone tuning in from New Brunswick. How you guys doing for snow up there? I'm not even sure. I think it's just Nova Scotia that got absolutely dumped on, especially Cape Breton. Holy smokes. Like I said, never seen so much snow in my entire life. And Colleen is saying, good afternoon from Ontario. It is good motorcycle riding, though, and I bet you don't have as much snow as I do. Dorian says, hi, Jeff. Gives us a heart. Judy says, good afternoon, everyone. It's been a while, but tuning in from Nova Scotia. Well, thanks for being with us. And it has been a while for me. I didn't get to the live there yesterday because I was just absolutely buried. Chet Chisholm over on Rumble is saying 4+ feet here. Yeah, that sounds about right. I heard 180 centimeters over the weekend. It's been absolutely insane. Nothing is moving out there. Like, roads are not plowed. I heard a rumor, I haven't verified, but sounds like the Cape Breton Regional Municipality actually invoked an emergency of some kind. So they got us all locked in our homes, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, the province didn't even declare that. And I'm not sure how that helps the roads get plowed any sooner. But yeah, they're finding every excuse they can to lock us in our homes these days. And Rob's here saying, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to take my time with these ones, guys, because we're still waiting for a couple of guys to join. They messaged me to say that they're having some technical difficulties. I don't see them in the studio yet, but yeah, we got some really important witnesses here to talk to. So Charlie Bravo giving us the triple slashy. Dave Moore says, good morning all from Toronto, and in a rare sunny day. Well, good for you. And let me see. Cindy says, good afternoon, Jeff Hart's. Good day, friends. Good day to you, Cindy. Thanks for always being with us. And Darlene's giving me the top cover. Says share. Yes, share the hell out of this. Doreen says share the hell out of this. Thanks, everyone. All right. And Chris Stacey is in the house, ladies and gentlemen. We missed out on our Muckraker Monday there yesterday, but it's all good. That just means we'll have more material for the next one. So always great to have you with us, brother. Oh, and Stephanie's here saying, good morning, friends. Here for about an hour. Let's get this party started. All right. I better get this party started then in that case. All right. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. Here is our philosophy quote for the day. No one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. Plato. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're going to be. That's the theme for today. No one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. And I don't think there's any other man in the history of Canada who's had so much hate hurled at him as Jeremy MacKenzie in the last few years. And, you know, I guess I should caveat that this is not an endorsement of absolutely everything that he says, but I may not agree with what he has to say, but I will fight to the death to defend his right to say it. That is the attitude that I think we need to get back to in Canada. That's the way we used to think, and gone are the days, unfortunately. So we're all striving around here to bring them back. And let's see, here's our meme for the day. And this is a Lord of the Rings meme for those of you just listening. And they have Jeremy Mackenzie's face pasted over, I don't know the character's name. I'm not a Lord of the Rings fan. So, but he's standing there holding his sword. And I think this is Ferryman here, who's got the one ring to rule them all, or whatever the heck they're doing in this silly movie. But yeah, and you know what? I should point out that the Lord of the Rings is a fourth turning. Gandalf is the elder prophet, and you've got the midlife nomad and the young hero, just like you do in Star Wars, and just like you do in every story about the great human saga. Okay, so with that, I think I will go ahead and bring in one of our guests here today. Anyway, Peter MacIsaac is with us, ladies and gentlemen, and Peter may be familiar to you guys from the Nova Scotia wildfires, and maybe I'll just let him kind of tell that story for us. But let's go ahead and bring him in here now. Peter, how you doing, brother? Good to have you aboard.
Good, buddy. A lot of snow down since I last saw you on Friday.
Yeah, no kidding. I guess we got it there just in the nick of time, huh?
Man, when you guys get out, my wife was saying they're going to be an hour out, and she was making plans for you guys to return, actually.
Oh, is that right?
Could have used your help shoveling, buddy. I could tell you that.
Oh, I could have used yours.
4 days of shoveling.
It's been nonstop. And Peter, as I recall, you did a video a while back that went pretty viral during the Nova Scotia wildfires. You want to give us a quick background on that, and just kind of let our audience know who you are for anybody who's not familiar?
Yeah, so a little background on me. I'm a retired provincial game warden. I had a film production company. I created 36 episodes of a East Coast hunt fish television series that aired in Europe, Canada, and the US. And I've been an entrepreneur. And then after I retired from DNR, I got involved in politics because I really naively believed that I could fix the system from the inside if I could get elected. Well, I failed to get elected, but stayed involved in politics. And recently came to the conclusion that the system is broken beyond repair, cannot be fixed in the current party system. And I watched a bunch of things happen, and I finally decided one way or another to take a stand. And every stand I've taken up to now has cost me dearly one way or another. But in the end, I'm a grandfather of 7, and my grandkids are expecting Grampy to do something to fix this mess. So that's what I've set out to do. And by God, I won't step down till the project's completed.
Good on you, brother. We appreciate your courage. And we do have another guest with us now. Here is a friend of Peter and I's from my neighborhood, actually. This is one of my homeboys, Glenn Jessome. How you doing, brother? Welcome aboard.
Good. I had a little technical difficulty with 2 different browsers, so I'm sorry I'm here. Do you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound good, man. And just so you know, like Paul is somewhere in the mix. It looks like he's trying to enter the studio right now, but he's getting there, I think. So we'll just stand by. But would you mind giving us a little background on who you are here, just for anybody who's not familiar with you?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was born and raised in Cape Breton, traveled to Australia. I went to Dalhousie University, got a math degree and teaching at Nova Scotia Teachers College. That's my educational background. Did some teaching in Australia, did some teaching here, taught math, physics, calculus, taught logic, critical thinking. And that's my personal background. And the relevant to this conversation background is that in 2007, I started to realize that there was a lot of injustice happening in courts and in government and in corporate. And I started listening to alternative media, which didn't exist really too much prior to that, 2008. So, I strongly believe in justice and truth and the truth getting out. And so, yeah, that's a quick one.
Okay, right on. So the reason that we have these gentlemen here with us today is because the 3 of us plus Paul looks like he's still trying to join. He's hitting me back and forth on the email here, and I'm not sure what his problem is in joining. But he is doing everything he can, apparently. So I guess we'll just grin and bear it, power through this thing. But the reason that we have these guys with us here today is because the three of us were up in Halifax last week for this hearing. This was a motion to dismiss on grounds of abuse of process that was submitted by Jeremy's lawyer. And so we went up to observe, and I was tweeting about it, as some of our listeners have pointed out, tried to give a good catalog of what happened. And also, I was going to point out, like, Peter, you've known Jeremy for quite a while, hey? I think he was... Yeah.
Actually, I met Jeremy for the first time, actually, when he was standing outside Dalhousie University with a group of other veterans. And he was every bit as upset as I was that Omar Khadr was being paid to show up and talk about some of the trials and tribulations he had gone through. Even though he's a self-confessed murderer who murdered one soldier, is on video creating roadside bombs and blinded another soldier. So I happened to be at the right place at the right time with a film company and caught Jeremy. And he was pretty upset. And I, just like I said, I was right place, right time. We did a video. I think it got something like 6.5 million views within 24 hours, went worldwide. And he painted a big target on his back that very same evening. Him and I met up shortly thereafter. I advised him, look, buddy, you're going to be a target from here on in. Your narrative flies directly in the face of the federal liberal narrative. And as a result of that, they're coming after you hard, buddy. And that's been proven to be the case. And we saw a lot of that in court last week.
Yeah, I was able to dig up a little something like the original video. Now, there's been several variations on this since it first went out. But this is the video here, essentially, that Peter's talking about. So this is going back a ways, but here we go.
My name's Jeremy MacKenzie. I'm a Canadian Forces Afghanistan combat veteran. I deployed with 2nd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment in 2007 to fight these people. These are not people that wear uniforms. These are not people that obey things like the rules of war or the Geneva Conventions. They use women and children as human shields. They're horrendous. They're monstrous human beings. They didn't care. They would blow up as many of their own civilians as they would do us. It didn't matter at all. And I have to be here to say this because many of the people from my platoon that were killed aren't here to say that anymore. They're all dead. Chris Stanix isn't here anymore. Sergeant Donnie Lucas isn't here anymore. I'm sick of staying home and staying on the couch and watching everybody just not say anything because this is wrong. This is not what Canada stands for. It's not the country that I signed up to fight for, and it is certainly not the country that those men and women died for. So I guess I'm the bad guy now. If that's how it's going to be, then that's how it's going to be. My name's Jeremy MacKenzie. I'm a Canadian.
Yeah, that's about the size of it too, folks. And I think a lot of us are feeling that now. It seems like all the people who signed up to serve for the right reasons and stuck to their principles through all of this, we're the bad guys now. So that's about the size of it. And Peter, you were the one who initially put that out, right?
Yeah. After the show, Jeff, I'll send you the original, a copy of it. What ended up happening is my dad was a tank commander with the Princess Pat's, 8th Canadian Hussars, and I spent my first 11 years on army bases, 4 years in Germany and the rest of the time here in Canada. And I related to what Jeremy was talking about wholeheartedly because of the stories I was told by Dad. Plus, Dad did a year on the Gaza Strip in 1963. And everything he said resonated with me, and everybody was standing outside. Initially, I went because I wanted to film Omar Khadr. And when they realized I could potentially be filmed, I got banned from the event as well. But the reality of it was having the opportunity to film him there. It was the timing couldn't have been better, and I can't think of a better spokesperson for what the military has had to experience over the last number of years and what we're all being subjected to than Jeremy, to be honest with you. And I'm watching what's happening to him now, and it's actually the only criminal here are the people who are after him. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace to Canada. Everybody involved with this should hang their head in shame. It's just an absolute disgrace.
Right. And what can you tell us about the events that led up to Jeremy being arrested and detained here? This was the protest, right, outside of Strang's residence?
Yeah, actually, I was made aware of it on Facebook. And I actually took my film gear and went out. I actually got my date wrong, and I went out a night previous. And I went, well, I guess I'd missed it. And I was there for the exact same reason that Paul Westhaver was there. I actually spent the first this time last year, I was still getting over my trip up to Ottawa. We were there for the first 5 days, or 2 years ago at the truckers thing. And I witnessed firsthand the absolute opposite taking place in Ottawa of what was being reported in the press. And so because I knew with my 29-year background in law enforcement, what law enforcement is capable of, and if they're trying to drive a narrative, they're willing to do false flags. They're willing to do basically anything to push a narrative. And that was also confirmed for me, by the way, by two staff sergeants who were on the beat that I happened to talk to personally while I was up in Ottawa, who told me at the time their number one concern was false flags that would be launched by the sitting government, and they'd use those false flags to paint the truckers and use that false flag operation to try to denigrate all the protesters and have them removed from Ottawa. And as they had told me, that's exactly what ended up happening. The Nazi flag thing was a false flag. Somebody did that. Trudeau's photographer happened to be strategically placed. So I knew firsthand from my experience, like I say, working with RCMP and multiple other different agencies, that what they're capable of. So I went out that night to film. I didn't make it that night, but Paul Westhaver went out on one of the subsequent evenings. And when he found the roadblock, his number one concern was that Jeremy and Morgan were probably going to take a beating by the RCMP because we watched it happen to innocent people up in Ottawa. Unlike Paul and probably most of Canada, who sat back and watched it and went, wow, these people seem to be pretty peaceful. I mean, for people who weren't there, it was probably like the best way to explain it would be it was Woodstock in the winter. It's probably the biggest party it was the biggest, most patriotic party in Canadian history that ever took place. I don't think it will ever be duplicated because it was so spontaneous in the way it worked. I've never seen an outpour of let me put it to you this way, Jeff. For the first time in my life at age 65, I was 63 then. I was literally proud to be a Canadian and stand amongst those people. So when Paul went out that night, he was quite confident that the RCMP would probably abuse their power, or someone in the system. And we saw a lot of that confirmed this week in court, and that they probably would use any pretext at all available to try to railroad Jeremy and Morgan May. And from what we saw this week, that's exactly what happened. So, and Paul was there as an eyewitness to that, same as I was in Ottawa. My job up there was to film what actually happened. I mean, in Ottawa, we had to disrupt cameramen that were sending up bogus interviews on a regular basis. It was pretty tragic. So, like me, Glennie, like yourself, like Paul who's coming on, we're just tired of being lied to by officials, whether they're in the police departments, whether they're in government. Like, the lies are constant. And most people, I'm going to say something here that's probably going to get me in some hot water with the government, but I don't give a shit anymore. So the reality of, pardon my language, sir, bottom line is, when I worked for the government for 29 years, we lied to people continually about everything. Everything we did over Department of Natural Resources. We either lied, and most of our lies were not outright lies. They were lies of omission. We never ever told you exactly the whole story. We'd give you enough that we could spin a story that was in favor of the sitting government. But the fact of the matter is, we lied every single day. And when people say to me, well, how do you know the government's not lying now? I mean, I can go back to, even when Pierre Trudeau was first in power, a bunch of things happened. The government lies continually to people. I mean, most people don't know that during the FLQ crisis, an RCMP officer set off a bomb on Canadian soil, and they used that information as a pretext to crack down further on protesters with the FLQ movement. Anyway, I could go on and on, Jeff.
Yeah, so could I. I mean, I did 20 years in the military, and I would agree with you that seems to be the going tactic across the board, is that we're constantly more concerned with optics than we are with effect. It's about creating the favorable optics, lying to the public, making to make us look good, this kind of thing, as opposed to actually doing good. So it's been that way for quite a while, as far as I can tell, my whole career. But yeah, it's a pretty sad state of affairs, guys.
Yeah.
And
If I can
okay.
if I can interject for a second, I got this secondhand information, but a friend of mine's uncle is a retired judge, and he told me about 10 years ago that this retired judge told him that in Canadian courts, it's not so much that justice is served, but that the appearance of justice gets served. So when people are forming these geopolitical narratives and whatnot, the judge doesn't always come down to the side of justice. It's just what seems, politically expedient.
Yeah. I
agree with that.
Had that experience recently, actually, because I was in court over the Nova Scotia wildfires, climate lockdown there. I had my challenge, which was a judicial review, dismissed, and just reading the review, it's almost like I didn't even read any of my arguments. It was just, I think, the easy decision as opposed to the right thing, because doing the right thing is never easy, of course. Okay.
It's like Jeremy's been saying on his podcast lately, is that he may actually get justice in a Canadian court because all the podcasting he's doing is giving him revenue that he can afford it. But right now, there's for every one Jeremy MacKenzie and Morgan Guptill, she's representing herself, but it's sort of tied together. But for every one of them, there's probably 10,000 Canadians that shake their head, don't ever want to go back to court again, don't want to see that kind of injustice. Family court, criminal court, civil court. There's so many wrong rulings. And again, if you don't have the money for a feared lawyer, because that's what I got from this week, I believe that the current judge is intimidated by the knowledge of law and the wit and the ability to put arguments together of Jeremy's lawyer. She almost seems cautious when she speaks to him.
The judge herself?
Yeah, I found she seemed very measured and cautious. There's quite a few times that he quoted law that she didn't know, and she had to look it up, and he's got it at the top of his head. So that can't happen. And what happens is when you have these high-priced, revered, feared lawyers, the judges are more compelled to do the right thing. But if it's just John Q. Citizen going in representing himself, he's freer. He can speak more. He's not bounded by the laws of the Barrister Society. But the judge will just dismiss every logical argument you make and see on your way.
Yeah, it sounds all too typical these days. And all right, so let's go back to, we showed up there. This would have been the second day of the hearing, but it was the same day that Dr. Strang was expected to take the stand as a witness. And I'm just going to take you guys back for a second at the start here, because we started out in the beginning, and I think this had something to do with Strang's scheduling or something like that. But there was a 911 dispatcher who kind of started everything off. You guys remember how that went down there? Like, they had the dispatcher come up, and she was it was with respect to a couple of different calls that were made on that night, because there was a 911 call and then there was another call. Go ahead, guys. What do you think? Do you recall what happened there?
Go ahead, Peter. You and just to be clear, there was 3 days of court last week. Peter made all three. You and I made two. And the first day, I didn't have my hearing aids with me, nor a device from the court, so I couldn't hear so much. But Peter could probably better answer that question. Peter?
Yeah. So what happened, guys, is on the day prior to that, I was there for the entire day, and a number of police officers were paraded through. I think there may have been five witnesses. Four of the five witnesses, the lawyer, by the way, was absolutely brilliant, highly effective, well-spoken, very, very well researched. And even though they name Jeremy as, they called him everything under the sun in this trial. His legal team actually are gentlemen. I think one is an African American, and I think the other gentleman is Middle Eastern. That's who he has representing him. But the lawyer actually went through and dismantled the five police officers. Four of them, he had them He had them so messed up that I believe at least 4 of the 5 perjured themselves. One police officer actually came in. He was highly credible, spoke the truth, wasn't biased at all, told his side of the story, got up and left. And the other 4 seemed to be in panic mode, where it was, let's see if we can't, let's make 100% certain that we cover our ass. We screwed up here. We didn't expect this would come to this. And these guys were struggling to try to keep their heads above water for the entire day. It was actually, I compared it to actually watching a person paint a Rembrandt, the job that the lawyer did. And what he actually proved, even on day 1, I didn't think it had to go to day 3. The evidence that we saw, and I'm not sure what we can or can't say. There's no ban on talking about what we saw. We had a guy admit on the stand that Jeremy MacKenzie did not have access to a lawyer, and the guy screwed up. And he tried, he got out a shovel and started digging everything around, trying to unbury himself, but it just didn't happen. He didn't get access to a lawyer, and then they sent him over to Dartmouth, where they knew he'd be strip searched, and I think he spent 4 days in solitary confinement. And the next guy who came in, I think he was hoping he'd cover his butt, and he didn't. He said no. Bottom line is, these police officers expect one another to be a professional. They don't have time to babysit one another. Either you do your job or you don't. And if you screw up, I mean, this particular officer screwed up major. All he had to do was say, look, I was worn out. I'm working too many shifts. I may have slipped up here, and told the truth on the stand. Instead, he did everything he could to try to keep himself from being in serious trouble. And what ended up happening is nobody else supported his statements. And I believe he's got himself in some pretty serious hot water. Yep. But the issue being is that for the rest of the information that came in that day, it was, it involved arresting officers, who made the arrests, why, where did the order to arrest come from? And then that leads us into the next day, and where you guys showed up, Jeff, and it was
Peter,
things got pretty crazy.
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Back there, because I think something that's worth saying, and I'll only make this very brief, but what's worth saying there is that when the political class and the media class pick somebody like Jeremy, who's actually reaching a lot of people through media and getting the truth through to them, when they paint somebody as a white supremacist, bigot, racist, Islamophobe, every kind of phobe you can throw, that's what they did with Jeremy. The political class did. They did it in the Parliament of Canada. They also did it, in various interviews and weird, stupid campaigns. But that went from the political class to the media class, and now there's a pylon. And I think sometimes that filters down to the police. If they think we've got this white supremacist because CBC told us, and now we're going to give him a hard time and be heroes to the people. But Jeremy is not a white supremacist. Like you said, he has an African-Canadian lawyer, and he's got an Arab-Canadian lawyer. So clearly the man is, and again, he will criticize all races like a lot of comedians do. Jeremy is technically a political satirist and a comedian, and that's what he does. And so anyway, sorry for cutting you off. Go back to day 2, Peter, But I think it's worth saying that I think the media and the political class has ganged up on Jeremy, and now that would make the police feel justified in not affording him his due rights or even civility.
Yeah. So what you're saying there, Glennie, is 100% accurate, because we saw in the next day's testimony when you guys first arrived, where there was a person working, doing security work for a company. And he was selling himself off to the RCMP as being the private or the special security for the premier, and making phone calls and asking for favors through police departments and through 911 based on his fictitious description of himself.
Yeah, he said he was a head of security for the premier's office. I think that's what he said, didn't he?
Yeah. So what it looked like, so what the lawyer was able to paint the picture, and it wasn't refuted, that in all indications, the premier had this wanted action taken against Jeremy MacKenzie and Morgan Guptill because they had the temerity to be able to and they were audacious enough to stand up and actually criticize the winged god, Dr. Strang.
Mhm.
And when he was on stand, I mean, the man's God complex was obvious. It was actually it was a sight to behold, to be honest with you.
Listen, in Dr. Strang's defense, the CBC has called him the father of Nova Scotia. His family's the first family of Nova Scotia. He signed 22 neckties and gave them out to people to make them heroes. So they had him on This Hour, his 22 minutes. He's the most unfunny guy I've ever seen. And they had him on reading lines on This Hour's 22 minutes. So he was basking in his fame, a bureaucrat. I asked somebody the other evening, I said, could you tell me who the previous chief medical officer for Nova Scotia was before Dr. Strang? I think that's his title, chief medical officer or something like that. They call him the top doc in CBC. And they said, no. I said, what about before them? No, they're never known. But he got to get put in the limelight, and then he got to play star, then he got to play victim. As he has men with guns surrounding his house, and cars and guns and equipment, he's there showing his force on 2 to 4 protesters, yet claiming victim that he was terrorized by these people. Anyway, sorry for wrecking your flow, but keep going, Peter.
No, not a problem. I mean, the point being is Dr. Strang was basking on his private boat called Fame, and it got sunk in court on Thursday with him on board.
Nice metaphor.
You know what? And it was actually, it was worth the price of admission to see this man get turned around and to have him in court actually label Jeremy. I think it was a misogynist, racist, hateful leader
Neo-Nazi.
of a Nazi organization.
Yeah.
And he didn't say that he had heard that. He came out and labeled him in that while under oath.
Yeah. And
I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure
and-
on the slander side of that, but Mr. Man, I'd be looking at a case just
Listen,
on
tell
that.
the viewership what the lawyer's rebuttal to that claim was, because it was classic. I couldn't hear very well, so you tell the audience here what the lawyer's rebuttal was to Jeremy being a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, everything.
So a little bit of background was that Dr. Strang had a couple people sitting in cars outside his house. The demonstration at its height was 20 people standing on a road, nobody on his property, no bullhorns, no flashing lights, no music, no anything, just people asking him. They wanted a meeting with him because he was actually working at home. They went through every avenue they could to meet with him at his regular place of employment downtown, but because he was working at home, they went to his second place of employment. And actually, he got on the stand and said that he was terrified and he was really put out. But then he defeated his whole case because him and his 17-year-old daughter, being as terrified as he was, he walked up to them and wanted to know, what their issues were. But then when he saw it was Jeremy and he saw that it was Morgan, he turned around and went back into the house. But no man that I know or ever grew up around would put his daughter, 17-year-old daughter, into any situation that in his own mind would believe would be dangerous. Like most men would say, honey, you and the kids get in the basement, lock the door, do not open that door till I come back, till I tell you it's okay, or police show up. Well, that's not what he did. He did the exact opposite of that. So then, we were trying to describe, well, why were you so, the lawyer said, well, why were you so afraid? And he gave a long litany of his description of Jeremy. And like I said, ultimately, the man said in public under oath that he really, he considered him to be a leader of a Nazi group and a racist and a bigot and a bunch of different stuff. And then the lawyer had questioned him and said, so where did you get all your information? Because Dr. Strang had access to a liaison with the RCMP, and he also had direct access to the person who was handling the private security for other provincial employees. He didn't call, he didn't do any of that. He called 911. And 911, he called 911, and then he had also notified the head of security, who in turn called back to the RCMP and seen how many people they were sending out. And so during that mix and the back and forth, the lawyer said, so where did you get all your information about Jeremy MacKenzie? He said, well, from my 17-year-old daughter and things that I'd seen online. And he said, well, you had access to these professionals. Did you make any phone calls and confirm that this just wasn't hearsay or that this was certifiable? And he said, no, I didn't. So the lawyer said, so what you're trying to tell us here in court today, that you formed your impression of this man by what you read online. And he said, yes, I did. And he said, you think that's accurate? He said, yes, I do. He said, would you be surprised that many people in Nova Scotia online call you a murderer?
That was classic.
That was great.
That was classic. And the air went out of the
Right.
balloon. And I mean, his face was as red as that poppy there on the right-hand side at the time. I
Yeah,
mean, he was so put out that someone would challenge his authority. I mean, he was complete. I mean, he said, you know, he was completely unwilling online to meet with anybody whose views didn't line up with his on handling the pandemic. And the other thing that he was very specific about, because he was asked about Canadians all have a charter. We all have a charter right to protest. We're not, there's things we can't do, but everything that was being done at the protest outside his house was 100% legal. There was no laws being broken. As a matter of fact, Paul Westhaver walked over to the police and said, "Excuse me, officer." He said, "Are any laws being broken?" And the answer, the officer didn't ask. He said, "I need an answer. Are any laws being broken?" And he went, "Nope." And so all's good. And everybody thought we're completely good, except for the province needed to make an example out of somebody. And so what ended up happening in all of Thursday's questioning, it became very apparent that the premier wanted action done because complaints were coming in from Dr. Strang. Dr. Strang was making unverifiable claims. Nobody ever stepped foot on his property. Everybody was doing what they were supposed to do. But the Jeremy MacKenzie artificially created boogeyman by the government seemed to be the poster child for how to let's squash somebody and send out a message. And so what ended up happening, as Jeff pointed out, the first person come in, confirmed in the 911 call that they typed out, based on the fact that he was outside their house, and they placed 2 phone calls through to his house that night on camera. And he said at that point he felt extremely, extremely terrified and concerned. And basically, the court proved that, well, you're working from home. You won't answer your phone at your other place of work. They try your second place of work, which you were working 50% of the time from home. Like, you can't have it both ways. If you're working from home, that's your place of work. If you're working from your office, that's your place of work that day. So basically, Dr. Strang boxed himself in with no way out, and he literally buried himself. And that's on that. I'm not a lawyer, but I spent a lot of time in court over my career. And what I witnessed, what happened there was the charge against Jeremy and Morgan are criminal harassment. Not only was it not criminal harassment, it wasn't even harassment. As a matter of fact, going after him appears to me to be a violation against his charter rights. And hopefully when all is said and done, I would like to see them go back and sue the province for what they've done for malicious prosecution. Because all the evidence I saw over those 3 days, that's what it indicates. As a matter of fact, when the arrest call went out, they labeled Jeremy MacKenzie as the leader of a far-right Nazi organization. Now, that's how they notified police to arrest this man. And then when they took him in, like I said, he never got his legal right to a lawyer fulfilled. And then they shoved him in the hole for 4 days, right, over at Dartmouth. And they did the same thing with Morgan. And the message was being sent, nobody is to question Dr. Strang. Nobody is to stand up to Tim Houston. Because I remember when Tim wanted to charge people $25,000 for standing on the side of the road with a sign that said freedom.
Yeah, unbelievable. And Chet Chisimov on Rumble is just saying it's worth noting that Dr. Strang only practiced as a physician for a rugby team for 3 years before he became a medical bureaucrat for the last 27 years. Yeah, I think that is worth noting because that's what he is. He's a bureaucrat. He's not the father of Nova Scotia. All of this smacks of a cult now where our province once stood. And Tim Houston didn't mince words about it either, because there was that news article that was quoted by Jeremy's lawyer there, where Tim was saying there isn't language harsh enough to condemn these actions with respect to the protests in Strang's neighborhood on the street in front of his house. And that first 911 dispatch, like I'm a little unclear on this now. It sounded to me like it was the same guy making 2 different calls. So there was the gentleman who was presenting himself as the chief of security for the premier's office. That was Ian Burke when he was on the stand. And apparently he called through the 911 line, but he also called the landline, like the regular landline, through the 7-digit number. And correct. What we saw was they had that dispatcher up there. And so they have their own system when they receive calls where she's just going to type it in there. And apparently what she had typed in was that Jeremy MacKenzie is a far-right neo-Nazi. So he's the leader of a neo-Nazi group, like you said. But then there was the recording that they played in court, and that wasn't said. So it appears as if there were actually two different calls. One, we don't have the recording for it. We just have the entry in the system that she typed in there that said Jeremy MacKenzie's a far-right neo-Nazi. So that right off the bat prejudices any law enforcement that might show up on the scene, like you said. And yeah, I mean, clearly the hammer came down pretty hard, and they didn't even have access to a lawyer, right?
Yeah, so one of the points was that Ian Burke, all indications were that the premier had said you're going to drop the hammer on these guys. And so Ian, who is the 31-year police veteran, knew the person over at 911 actually quite well, actually. And he called her initially with the looking for the arrest information, and then or giving her the arrest information, knowing that the conversation would be recorded. Then when he hung up, he called her on a separate line and said, "Oh, by the way, make sure you put this in, that he's the leader of a far right-wing neo-Nazi thing." Because on stand, she said no. She said that wouldn't have come from me. I would have been given that information to type it in. Mm-hmm. So basically, everybody, it was one of those things. It was, oh my God, I need to cover my ass bad here. This blew up on us. How are we going to save our necks? As a matter of fact, I think a couple of weeks later that Ian Burke got shifted over to a new position. He didn't get fired, even though the Department of Justice had to buckle down on him because he kept representing himself as being something that he wasn't to police agencies. Even the watch commander, the RCMP officer that was brought in, who was at Strang's house. I've never seen a level of arrogance from a person on the stand like that, probably ever. I mean, it was how dare you question me? Right? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know I'm an RCMP watch commander? I personally can't imagine being ever working for the woman. She just, anyway. I don't want to disparage her anymore, but the reality of it is the amount of manpower they had at one time. I believe they had 6 officers for four people sitting in cars. So to paint the picture here, so people understand, Dr. Strang lives on the end of a cul-de-sac. With very, very low traffic and only maybe a half a dozen homes on it. And the people weren't on his property. There was nobody threatening anybody. He said he saw a man dressed in black standing at the end of his driveway, and that caused him fear. Well, that was one of the plainclothes police officers, by all indications. I mean, the witnesses say that that's very likely who it was. So what ended up happening is it just got to be Dr. Strang was saying that that he had learned about who Jeremy MacKenzie was online, and then Greg Burke was saying he learned about who Jeremy MacKenzie was from Dr. Strang, and Dr. Strang is basically they're pointing the finger at one another of who ultimately said that Jeremy MacKenzie was all these things that they were trying to create him to be. So, like I said, the province needed a boogeyman. He was the boogeyman they were looking for, and him and her. And they got arrested that night. From everything that we saw over the 3 days, now the judge is still going to rule on this, but a message was sent, and the message was sent: you will not. Nobody defies Dr. Strang, and nobody defies Tim Houston. And if you do, we're going to put our military boot on your neck and crush you. And we don't care what it costs you in court down the road. We're going to send a message. And so, we watched witness after witness come in. And one of the most important witnesses would have been Paul Westhaver, because the lawyer had FOIPOP after FOIPOP, which is freedom of information protection of personal information. And Paul Westhaver has over 100 of them in relation to this. And so when the lawyer was cross-examining, when he was cross-examining any of the witnesses, and when they would say, I don't recollect, which was standard operating procedure, it seemed to be deny, 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 deny. I can't remember. I don't have my notes. Well, they actually had FOIPOPed copies of notes, emails, and they'd say, I don't remember the meaning. I'll give you an example. Mr. Burke actually was called into the bail hearing for Jeremy MacKenzie, right? Why would a private security company, head of a private security, be called in for a bail hearing? And then he had that, I mean, the guy had the gall to sit there and say, "Don't know why I got called in." Well, not a problem. There was a room full of you. You're a 31-year police veteran. Did you take any notes? No, didn't take any notes. Did anybody else take notes? Gee, nobody else seemed to take notes either. So nobody took notes. You didn't talk. Don't know why you were invited, but yet you were there for a bond hearing where this guy ends up in solitary confinement for 4 days, right? So what happened is at least 4 of those original five officers completely destroyed their credibility in front of the judge. I wouldn't want to be them going in front of a judge anytime in the future, because the credibility is now gone from what I witnessed. Right.
So, and then Burke, he actually sent all those bail conditions, like the conditions of his release, in an email out to everybody else who was involved, like within the bureaucracy, anybody who was even close to it. Right.
Wow. Yeah. So basically what, he buried himself by doing that. Don't get me wrong. The guy's trying to save his neck, and he did his best, but he's on the same boat that sank along with Dr. Strang, the SS Fame, right? Yeah. Another guy went down the tube. That's what we should call the Dr. Strang boat, the SS Famous, right? And he did his best impression of Gilligan. It was entertaining, to say the least, to see a man like that who has such a high opinion of himself. By the way, I want I want your viewers to take note of something else that he said. One of the things that Strang said, Jeremy's lawyer had said, so you do realize that in Canada, under the charter rights, people have they have the legal right to peacefully protest. And he said, I don't care. Not near my house, they don't. And he said, so you're willing to crush charter rights? He said, I don't care what it said. He said, I don't care what the charter says. I don't want them outside my house. Well, he may not, but that's the way protests work, right? Yeah. And then he said, so are you saying that applies to everything? He said, even with all your lockdowns and the other things that you did? And he said he'd be willing to crush whatever he needed to get what he wanted, as long as there was a majority. So 51% think that you should be locked up. The other 40, he would support the other 49% being locked up. He was an absolute tyrant whose only concern was for his own family. He has zero concern for any of the family that his edicts damage. And Paul Westhaver has all the foy pops that prove it.
You know what? I heard Strang use the term, what they were doing was very inappropriate. And there's a fine line, not a fine line, there's a very distinct line, actually. I was using a wrong cliche there. Very distinct line between inappropriate and illegal. So they were on the street. People say they protested at his property. That's just a common way of speaking it, but it's not true. They weren't at his property. They were at public property, a public street outside of somebody's workplace because he worked from home.
Exactly.
And that's not just spin. They did try, it came out, they did try through phone calls and through emails to get in touch and express their displeasure with the tyrant that Dr. Strang had clearly become to be. But at the time, they had the populace all thinking Strang's a hero and going to save everybody, while he's instilling fear in them. It's really, really weird how so many evil people, I don't like to overuse that expression, I don't use it much, but how evil people will accuse people of that which they are guilty of themselves. And absolutely. Strang terrorized the whole province. Some people to the point of stress-related illness, and we all know that the mask didn't work. Now we all know that the vaccines weren't effective. Even if you're the dumbest of the dumb, you still have to say, "Well, my friend had COVID 4 times and he got 4 vaccines." So even that. Now again, the more intelligent people who are listening to real scientists and real doctors are talking about vaccine injuries. Some top doctors and statisticians in Canada, they're estimating, which I think is low, just from my own personal feeling and my own personal experience, they're saying about 17 million people are no longer here because of these mRNA COVID jabs. Now, I know they try to steer away from that in the motion in the court case, but, Morgan and Jeremy were there protesting children being masks, but there were so many other things, the 6 feet, that can't go, you need to have a vax passport, you got to take this as an experimental injection, which now is known to be dangerous. Like Morgan and Jeremy are guilty of something. They're guilty of having courage where very, very few other Canadians had courage. They didn't go there to cause mischief. They didn't go there to break the law. They went there to draw attention to the insanity that they can see, and they're upset that a lot of other people aren't seeing it. And sorry if I get over emotional there, but that's the way I see it.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I think what they're guilty of here is heresy. It's blasphemy. You know, he's the father of Nova Scotia, as in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And what they've done here is they've blasphemed his holy dogma, and so they shall be crucified. And some of the things like you guys touched on there, like with some of the Strang's comments when he was being crossed by Foda, who's Jeremy's lawyer. Because he asked him about his public profile and about the signing of the neckties. And he talked about the charter rights and how it is a right to protest. And he even said, do you realize that in Canada, we have a history of people protesting outside of politicians' homes? And he just went, well, I'm not a politician. So it seems like, you know, he's slippery as all get out. And there was a really good point, I think, that Foda landed there in the cross, because you guys were talking about how, you know, he'll go ahead and tyrannize us as long as he has about 51% of support in Nova Scotia. And Foda was saying, because he was saying it was democratic. It's like it's democratic tyranny because I have the support of the population. And Foda pointed out, well, you realize that in democracies we also have protections for minorities, right? It's not majoritarianism. Like, we need to build these human rights into the system so that doesn't happen. And he said, you take a utilitarian view on these things. I don't even think Strang really knew what that meant. But he didn't seem to disagree, I guess. And utilitarianism is basically the root philosophy of, you know, fascism, communism, so on and so forth. It's the collectivist mindset. So he seemed to think that it was democratic of him to impose this tyranny. And he was basing the level of support on things like the number of people who took the jabs or who complied. So he seems to be absolutely oblivious to the idea that perhaps the coercive measures that he put in place may have bolstered those numbers a little bit. So just an utter lack of self-awareness, I guess, on the part of Dr. Strang. And just keeping with that, with the lack of self-awareness, that was something else I thought that Foda did a pretty good job of demonstrating. He's like, because he was talking about Strang is saying, you know, protecting my children. It's all about my family. When it comes to my family, I'm not messing around. So I'll do whatever I have to do to keep my family safe and protect my family. And it seemed utterly lost on the morally bankrupt mind of this bureaucrat that perhaps the people who were demonstrating were also concerned with the welfare of children, because they were in fact there to protest the continuance of the mask mandates in schools beyond the emergency declaration, right?
Yeah. If I can interject for a second there too,
Go for it.
You hit a chord, because it's children, but it's also family. My Uncle Angus, I told him these are experimental. He knew I was in contact with some doctors and scientists from all over the world, working on trying to get the truth about this technology out and how unsafe it was. And, you know, all the things it was doing, by the way, didn't just happen by accident. They were predicted by people who said, don't give these things. And a lot of them, Dr. Byron Bridle, Canadian PhD, did research. You don't get more pro-vaccine than him. His research is in trying to come up with a vaccine for cancer, which personally I think is futile, but he's pro-vaccine as you get. He looked at the technology and said, I'm not giving it to mine, and you shouldn't give it to yours. I can't pull the names off right now because I'm alive here. But there's other doctors in Europe that were vaccine scientists that worked for, you know, big vaccine manufacturers like Pfizer, Moderna. Well, not Moderna, because Moderna never made a single product ever before this. But there was a lot of vaccinologists, virologists, who said these are very, very harmful. So I told my Uncle Angus, look, I have the inside skinny. I can explain the science to you basically, but please don't take them. So he took 3 and he threw a blood clot and he died. Now, Now, the skeptic would say, you don't know that that's what killed him. You're right. I don't know that that's for sure what killed him. I know he never had any history. He was like 70-some years old, early 70s. He was a relatively healthy guy. He never had a history of blood clots. Nobody in our family ever died of blood clots. His autopsy proved that he died of a blood clot. Now, we had 4 vaccines approved in Canada. 2 of them were taken away for causing blood clots. Dr. Strang was with Premier Houston on a video one day after most people had gotten that were getting them. And he said, yeah, if you're male and 30 and under, you shouldn't take one of the Pfizer Moderna. I can't keep it straight which one, because there's a high risk of myocarditis. I've got 2 friends, and I know a few teenage kids now that have myocarditis. It used to be, according to one of the world's foremost cardiologists named Dr. Peter McCullough, it used to be that 3 to 5 people in a million would develop myocarditis. Doctors and nurses would go their entire careers without seeing a single case of myocarditis. It was so rare, right? Mm-hmm. Now people are dying of myocarditis, and people are living with myocarditis, which, again, if you got myocarditis, they say within 5 years, there's a 50% chance that you will die. But again, because the court hearing isn't about that, and they don't want it, because the mainstream thinkers, the mainstream people, all they have to do, like they did labeling Jeremy a white supremacist, all they have to do is call you an anti-vaxxer, and in the minds of 80% of the people who are believers and not thinkers, that's just my estimate, by the way, but the believers, not thinkers, if they label you an anti-vaxxer, if they label you a racist, if they label you something and they come from authority, it will stick. And one last thing I'll add is I have discovered early on in my life, my 20s, I realized something, that almost everybody overestimates the intellect of popular people and famous people, especially themselves, right? Just because you're famous, just because you're popular. Like, I'm not taking any health information, from Britney Spears, Oprah Winfrey, Donald Trump. I'm not taking any scientific advice for any of those scientifically literate people. They've got money. Happy for you. Proud, not jealous. Giver. Not proud. Sorry. I'm not jealous of people that have money. But there's this weird thing that happens, and it permeates all of society, is that wealthy, famous, popular people have powers of intellect that they just don't have. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Like Socrates, and I know Jeff has studied a lot of this stuff. The greatest thinkers in the world are only respected like after they're safely dead. While they're alive, they're seen as a danger to the status quo. Your brightest are always seen as dangers. Anyways, there's my rant.
That's a great point. And Strang was on the stand for quite a while there. He was there in the morning and in the afternoon, and it was quite the cross, I thought. And I mean, just to give you a flavor for the kind of testimony that he gave, like, I'm pretty sure that he perjured himself multiple times.
Me too.
Say that. I mean,
I am too, Jeff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Peter, go ahead. Tell us why you think that.
Well, a number of the things. One of the things is he initially said when he called in 911, people were on his lawn. Yeah. Then later on, cross in the afternoon, he said, well, nobody was on the property. Everybody was on the road. All the information proved that that's just flat not true. All the eyewitness testimony said, and then finally he agreed, well, maybe they weren't. But initially, when he was calling in a complaint, he lied in his complaint in order to have 911 get RCMP to show up. Right. And then virtually, like I said, there was only one police officer there who I think didn't perjure himself. Virtually almost everybody, even the head of the Justice Department, that particular gal. I mean, she continued to insist over and over again that the Department of Justice cannot influence police. But I know factually, when the Department of Justice suggests to police that they do something, it's not just a suggestion. You need to get this done. Yeah. So I watched a lot of people perjure themselves, but very specifically, I believe that Strang not only perjured himself, I believed he set himself up for a major defamation case.
Yeah. What cases of perjury did you see, Jeff?
Well, it was all the way down to just petty things, even where Foda was saying, like, how did you come to the conclusion that he was a neo-Nazi white supremacist? And he said that he had watched his live streams, and Foda says, you mean that you saw clips from his live streams in certain articles, and he's like, oh no, I watched entire live streams. And he's like, you mean that you went to antihate.ca and you saw certain clips that are taken out of the context, and you would admit that a clip that's from a much longer show is not an accurate representative sampling of what he's been saying. And he was obstinate. He was like, no, I've watched entire live streams to come to this assessment. And I'm like, there is no way, like that's not even a credible statement. I can't imagine that anybody that was listening to him say that believed that as these protesters were outside his house, that he was watching a 4-hour live stream or multiple 4-hour live streams. And I hate to say it, but it seems like a missed opportunity. You should have asked him, who is Philip, for example?
Yeah.
Tell us who Philip is.
Well, actually, that did get to come up on Friday. So
wow.
So what ended up happening was when Paul Westhaver came on. Paul was the last. He was the last person to be interviewed, I believe, on Friday. Or did someone else come on after him? I can't remember. Anyways, Paul Westhaver. For you folks who don't know Paul Westhaver, his resume is long as my two arms. I mean, he's a highly accredited engineer with an engineer's mind. He's been issued over 20 patents. He was involved in the nuclear industry in the U.S. I think he actually helped build some of the technology on the bridge that goes over to PEI. But basically, Paul is a geek. He won't mind me saying that because he kind of is.
Yeah.
Right. And he's an engineer, and he sees the world through engineers' eyes. I don't have engineers' eyes. He sees things I don't. And he takes things and then dismantles them and puts them back together. So we started asking questions about, what's going on in the country after you had seen people, beaten by the RCMP who were following now proven illegal orders up in Ottawa, and nobody bothered to question them. So how is it that the last bastion of our civility here in the nation, the RCMP, will willingly follow illegal orders and beat up peaceful protesters? So we started doing all these FOI pops. So when the lawyer finally got him on and started asking Paul all these numerous questions, he just systematically dismantled the Crown's assumptions. And one of them was they were adamant that, they wanted to know, how do you know Jeremy MacKenzie? Well, they met Jeremy through Morgan May. Because, much like Paul, it was like myself, I was very concerned about the amount of charter rights that were being crushed by the province, and nobody cared. And I know how police do stuff. Let's go do this now. We'll deal with the repercussions later, but nobody's not going to follow our orders. Very, very Hitlerish, I guess would be the way to put it. And so what ended up happening when they got Paul in and started asking them, the prosecution was adamant that he was supporting everything that Jeremy MacKenzie says, and that they could not believe that he didn't watch all of his podcasts. And I mean, Paul just said, I don't watch his podcasts. And they said, and they just went on and on and on that you must know about his podcasts. And he said, well, no, I'm an engineer. He said, he's substantially younger than me by over 20 some years. He travels in a different circle. Him and I, we relate on charter, on many charter issues, but I don't really follow his podcast. So you're telling me that you don't know. And then she'd say, well, if you never watched it, how do you know if you don't like it? Well, that's like saying, if you've never ate cucumbers, how do you know if you don't like them? I don't like the smell of them. I'm not interested in cucumbers. And they went on and on. And, they played round and round the mulberry bush. And then finally, Paul said, look, Jeremy, I don't mean to hurt your feelings. But he said, I know that you're a comedian. And he said, these people are trying to paint you as a far right-wing Nazi. But he said, are you people aware that this organization called Diagolon that you're talking about is run by a plastic, time-traveling, cocaine-addicted goat?
Yeah.
And that was that, and that's sworn testimony. And you could just see the jaws drop on the prosecution. He said, based on that, I'm really not interested in his podcasts. He said, I'm interested on his views on when people crush charter rights. And when you get charged for things that you didn't do in order to send a bad message. Yeah. And he was about as measured and as accurate as, to me, if you were picking a witness, he would be like the perfect witness. I mean, he literally took them apart in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was really good. And just another thing on the Strang front too, because we were talking about like our suspicions of perjury there, but he basically started, like he opened with some of that as well, because when Morgan was the first one to get to question him, and she stood up, and I can't even remember how she opened with the question, but she said something about me or I as it related to her, and he said, "Well, I don't know who you are. I don't know your name." That was the first thing almost.
Yep.
I think that he said while he was on the stand. But he had to be aware of who she was, not just because he was going into this case and would have gotten some kind of prep, I would assume. But so he would have been aware of the people who were named as parties to the proceedings, but also because she's part of Freedom Nova Scotia. And he was the guy who got that ex parte injunction to stop a protest that was put on by Freedom Nova Scotia. And I mean, he was granted that injunction. They shut down the protest even after Black Lives Matter were allowed to protest all over the province without Strang saying a word. And that appeal is actually, it was ruled unanimously that the appeal for that ex parte injunction will go ahead in the Nova Scotia Court of Appeals now. So there's just right off the bat, I found that he sort of destroyed his credibility as soon as he opened his mouth.
Actually, Jeff, by the time he was done, he had no credibility left. One of the things that he said is when he went up to the car, he recognized her.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys caught that, but he said when he went up to the car and looked in and saw who was in there, Jeremy and Morgan, then he decided to go back to the house with his daughter.
Wow. And then after that, that is clear perjury. Yeah. Because he doesn't. Yeah. I tell you, we in this nice thing about private life, not court, we are allowed to speculate. You can't speculate in court. You have to make arguments. Speculation is frowned upon. But, in speculating that, Morgan is a female. She's diminutive in stature. She's soft-spoken. And perhaps when he said, when she stand up and said, "I don't know who you are," he was going soft because, in the woke culture, right? She's higher on the hierarchy of victimhood. So he could attack Jeremy as a white supremacist Nazi because he's a, straight white female or straight white male. But perhaps, he was lying because he's going with his programming of, I don't want to seem like I'm attacking a woman here with my testimony. It's possible.
Yeah, that's a very astute observation, I think, because she's a woman. Morgan is higher up in the hierarchy of oppression than Strang is. And he's, an old white male, so he should be at the bottom of the hierarchy. And he's in a position of power too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these, woke people too, like they sincerely believe their ideology, and it shapes their thinking. It's not like they even strategize, but they they believe their own bullshit. Is the way to say it, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think
they
you're
do.
right.
So. Well, and you got to remember, guys, if somebody on the right believes it and somebody on the left, they actually they get in these little clusters where they convince one another what they're saying is actually true and that they're not clinically delusional.
Yeah. I don't have many beliefs, and when I find out I have them, I try to kill them. It works better for me in life to have no beliefs. Like just it's not my first line of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there were also the claims, of course, that he felt unsafe because of their presence. Yeah, and here he was taking his daughter out to confront these people, essentially, to go meet with them, and take the license plate and all of this stuff. And he really, he started off. Well, at one point in his testimony, anyway, the photo was questioning him, and he said, what was it about the nature of the protest and what prompted him to make these calls? And there was an issue that he took with the length of the protest, but there was also like his earlier testimony where Morgan had actually questioned him. And it was on, his presence in the office. And so they were talking about how he would respond to emails where people were sending in these emails to express their concern about the mandates. And people had tried calling his office and stuff like that. And he made no qualms about it. He was like, oh yeah, we just kind of screen out all of those emails. We don't listen to the crackpots. I have an admin assistant who also has access to my mailbox, and she just screens out all of that crackpot nonsense. And she doesn't forward any calls to me that are coming from the crackpots. But I'm available. I'm available to hear these concerns from anybody. So there's this, contradictory testimony on his part, I think, that even demonstrates
he's available for agreement. He's not available for disagreement.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. Just incredible.
So one of the other points that should be brought up, when he did go up to the car, my understanding was that there were 6 police officers and 4 protesters.
Right.
Yeah.
So the question was asked, would you been willing to have 6 police officers stand beside you while somebody sitting in a car, one guy and one gal, asked you questions as to why you were implementing what you were and what proof that you had that this would work and whether it was reasonable? He said, no. He said, I wouldn't be willing to do that because they hadn't gone through the proper protocols. But then later on, he also sunk himself because he was adamant throughout all his testimony that he would not talk to you without a meeting that went through the proper protocols. And then on a rainy day, some gal shows up in a wheelchair and a sign, and he realizes, man, I got to do something about my image. He's got to pull a Bill Gates. Let's get a firm to try to make it look like I'm not the evil son of a bitch people are starting to think I am. So he pulls on a raincoat and walks up the driveway and talks to her. Oh, look what a good guy I am. Here's what I did. Well, she didn't follow any of the protocols, didn't do anything. But because he didn't know that she wasn't going to question his authority, like the bottom line, it would be like going in to negotiate with a Mussolini or a Hitler. I mean, we appreciate what you have to say, but as soon as we're done, you're going to be shoved down the hole for 4 days for questioning me. How dare you question Dr. Strang?
Yeah, 1,000%. There was, the guy who was kind of at the middle of all this in terms of the police engagement and everything was Burke as well. And he's corporate security. Yeah.
Yep.
He was corporate security for the province of Nova Scotia. And just going back to what Glenn was just saying about how they kind of believe their own lies, like there's this confirmation bias that ends up forming a dogma within these cults that essentially just sort of organically arise in these situations. There, we had that expert from Department of Justice there. I think she was a director, and she was on the stand as well. And there was a lot of question with respect to undue influence, because Burke, like you mentioned, is like a 31-year veteran of the HRM police, and he's presenting himself as the chief of security for the premier. And she was being asked, don't you think that this kind of presentation, this approach might exert some kind of undue influence on the police? And she would say, no, he doesn't have any authority to direct the police. And he's like, well, no, I'm not asking about his direct authority. I'm asking about whether or not it would exert any kind of an undue influence. And she says, no, because the police can't be influenced by outside. So there seems like there's this kind of faith that they have in the institutions just based on, I guess, what's on paper.
It's getting increasingly authoritarian. And what I felt was interesting about her testimony as well is it was discovered and presented through FOIPOP evidence by the defense, who, by the way, the defense was, the onus is on them now to in the motion, because the onus is on the defense to get the motion passed. But when it goes back to trial, it shifts. But at any rate, this witness, I thought she might have been the deputy to the Minister of Justice, but she I think
director.
Deputy director, right next to. So what I thought was interesting is that Jeremy's lawyer brought to light the fact that she had made several emails to Ian Burke to get him to stop interfering. And she tried to make it about, I thought it was more than that, but anyways, she tried to make it about clarity of communication, which again, people in military and government would resonate with that being clarity of communication. But seems like if you actually think about what's happening here, because the lawyer questioned her, she, although not directly in his authority, she's higher up, right? She's higher up, closer to the top of government. So when she sends him repeated emails and maybe even phone calls, who knows, but she made several communications with him to stop him to interfering directly with the police, because there's supposed to be that separation between the executive branch and the judicial branch, so that you don't become a government that sends out the jackboot thugs at will. And so it was very, very interesting. She didn't deny it. She just said that that she didn't, she's not going to make a judgment because she's not his boss on whether it's inappropriate, but she thought it was inappropriate enough to tell him several times, please stop doing this. Right. Mm-hmm. And again, that speaks to the motion. The motion is to stay the charges on the basis of abuse of process. And so that's really cutting to the heart, not of the whole trial, but of this particular motion. That cuts to the heart of it. There clearly was abuse of process. So I think that Jeremy's lawyer is going to be able to prove that, and it probably will get dropped. But a lot of us are thinking it's going to be harder on Jeremy, harder on Morgan. But if this goes to trial, by God, there's going to be some things come out. Pandora's box is going to get opened up, and nobody will be left unscathed.
And thanks for the correction on that, because I thought I said a motion to dismiss, but you're right. It's a motion to stay.
Yeah.
Which basically means that the charges could still be hanging over their heads for about a year or something like that. As opposed to if they were dismissed outright. And she was really concerned with Burke's practice of calling watch commanders directly too. Like he knew everybody that was involved. He wasn't just calling dispatch, he was calling the watch commanders directly. And you and I were talking about this on the way back, Glenn, but I think she was actually sincere in saying that it wasn't what FOTA called the I believe it was the independence of police operations that she was concerned with. It was just that the information was coming in through multiple channels, and that created confusion in terms of what was going on, because we have all these different reports coming from the same guy that may make it appear as if they are multiple reports coming from multiple sources. And then there's this kind of sorting out that needs to happen. And she's a bureaucrat. And I mean, I was in headquarters for 10 or 11 years of my career. So I feel like I have a pretty strong appreciation for the morally bankrupt mind of the bureaucrat. And it really tends to be, it really does tend to be about the protocol, the recognition of their higher position, this kind of thing. And the idea that FOTA kept really trying to hammer home was that this represents a corruption of the process. This represents undue influence. And she just seemed like she had so much faith in the system that she couldn't accept that. She couldn't accept the idea that police even could be unduly influenced. She just says no, because police don't answer to him. Police, he doesn't have any authority to direct police. So again, I think that just goes to show this faith in the institutions is like it's Nietzschean, where Nietzsche said the more we secularize as a society, the more we would put that religious impulse into the state. And here we have the staties, that make up the new high priesthood. And they have so much faith in the protocol and the system that the
difference between the theoretical and the practical. If Peter MacIsaac calls the Halifax Regional Police right now and says, my car's stolen, they're not going to get to him for a couple of weeks if they even bother, right? And they'll just say your insurance will take care of it, all the kind of stuff. If Tim Houston or Dr. Strang right now called and said, my car was stolen, what do you think the action is going to be? It's going to be immediate, right? And it's going to be taken seriously.
Lenny.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so people that want to pretend that people don't give weight to authority, maybe in theory that's the way it's supposed to go, and it's great that they set that up, but in practice, when a guy, and here's another thing, what would be the motivation? Why did he identify himself as something that he wasn't? Because he wanted to put himself closer to power so that the police would act. And that's why he misidentified himself as being the chief of the Premier's office, not the head of corporate security for the province of Nova Scotia, which I find cool too, because your average layman citizen, you guys have studied a fair bit about government, but the average citizen, I would suggest, doesn't realize that Nova Scotia is a corporate legal entity. Canada is a corporate legal entity, and they just think that government is just, we got to do what they say, because there's a government, right? But they don't actually know about the corporate aspect of it. Anyway, sort of go off on a tangent, but it's like you said, it's really disheartening to see people who will throw out protocol, throw out rules, and there's a weird thing. I'm just skipping for something, but it came to me. And I think it's important. So I won't say who I was with, but I was with a gathering of people who've been called everything under the book, white supremacists, this, that, and everything else. And in a 2-hour conversation, all I heard about was this legal action, this legal action, this legal action. Who's doing that legal action? This legal action. Worst anarchists in the world. Basically what I'm trying to get at is Jeremy and Morgan wanted the laws of Nova Scotia followed.
That's
right?
it. That's all
what
they were asking for.
They want the laws of Nova Scotia followed, right? Like Jeff and I were upset last spring. We weren't allowed to go. There were signs that we couldn't, after 4 days of rain, because there's fires on the other side of the province. We're in a place that's by the ocean, really green leaves. It's wet, and we're not allowed in there. And the fine for going in the woods during a fire ban is $300, but they arbitrarily changed it to $25,000. Somebody said, well, that's just a threat. They didn't really do it. People are dumb. You got to keep them in line. But they did. Yeah, there was one lady who got, she had a fire pit in her backyard, nowhere near the woods, apparently. And she got $29,000 when they threw a couple other fines at her. Firemen had to come and put out her fire pit in her backyard. So it's weird. So for anybody that would call us anarchists and rebels and all this kind of stuff, they don't know what they're talking about. We're actually wanting laws to be upheld. And I'll tell you, I wrote it down there so I don't mess it up, but I love this quote. It resonated with me since I heard it about 10, 15 years ago. It was a JFK quote, and he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." And what's happening is this: what Morgan and Jeremy did was not violent, but they're trying to paint it as Dr. Strang felt unsafe, and it's all about safety and with the threat of violence. There was no threats of violence made. There was no weapons presence. They were outnumbered. So all of their narrative that Morgan and Jeremy were acting outside of law and violent and like anarchists is the opposite. They're wanting to see laws upheld. And under the EOs, emergency orders, it was different in the United States and Canada, but under the EOs, they let an experimental mRNA technology gene therapy be put into the arms of roughly 90% of Canadian adults. And so that's outside of law. That's not legal. But again, right now, the average person is so dumbed down. Well, if it's popular, well, okay, it's popular. That doesn't make it legal, right?
One of the points in regards to legality, Glennie, my wife spent half her working career in cancer clinical trials and routinely every day had to deal with informed consent documentation.
Yeah.
What your listeners need to know that your average informed consent consists of 21 to 32 pages of documentation. Each page has to be explained to you by a doctor, and then you have to initial the bottom of each page, and that person has to initial the fact. And at any time, under the Nuremberg Code, should you decide to withdraw from participation, you can. You cannot be forced to do anything. And I would ask everybody watching to go ask Siri to look up criminal code, coercion, and see the definition of it, and then go look up the criminal code definition of intimidation. And what the province did in regards to the whole vax program, custom fit the definition of both coercion and intimidation. And that's where if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're going to have repercussions. And what I'm telling you to do, what I'm telling you to do can't be justified legally.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, so what ends up happening, when those type of things happen, is right off the bat, my wife went to me, she said, whoa. She said, my entire career just went out the window. Every single thing we have to do on these multi-million-dollar on these multi-million dollar clinical trials somehow are getting set aside. There's more to this than meets the eye. So under, we did everything we could, everything possible with our family to say, well, let's just hold off on here, right? I mean, I saw a picture of a lab rat that said, "Are you getting the vax?" And he said, "No, not till human trials are over," right? And so,
the funny thing about that, there's truth in it, because when they did
is.
do in experimentation, not of this particular one, but in experimentation with mRNA technology, there was lots of animals where all the animals died. I think one was ferrets.
Every ferret died. So the issue is that, and that came up later on Friday. They wanted to know, with Paul Westhaver's testimony, why do you distrust government? And then it went back again to Paul had gone in, and him along with Shelley Hipson. You can go to shelleyhipson.ca and see the bulk of the FOIPOPs that they have. And at the end, they asked Paul Westhaver, when he was asked to identify as to why he mistrusts the government on this issue. He said, "Your Honor, that I believe I don't want to prejudice the ruling on this case, but I have enough FOIPOPs that in the government's own handwriting that I have actual possession of now that are catastrophic to the provincial government and may end up with people in prison for life." I think he said the prison thing, but I'm not sure whether he had said that or not. But
No,
the bottom line is,
he didn't say the prison thing. What he did say is he didn't want to prejudice the court against him.
That's what it was.
But he
did say that the data was catastrophic to the government.
Yeah, it was disturbing. I think it was
disturbing.
Disturbing was the word he used. He uses catastrophic with me all the time, so I'm mixing it up. But I know what some of the data it is. And let me be quite clear. The data is catastrophic, both to Dr. Strang and to the Premier.
Yeah. Well, I just know like I said, I'm one person, so anything I say in the scientific literature is called anecdotal evidence. But I have a former student, blood clot in his leg, died. Uncle died. Friend in Sydney took 2, didn't want to, had to see his mother. Again, coercion. His mother's in the home. He wasn't allowed to see his mother in the last years of her life. So against his better judgment, he took 2, and he collapsed. Healthy guy, 57, 58, just collapsed and died of a heart event. There's so much happening. And that's why I really do think, when I look at my own and how many people I know, I think the number of 17 million dead from these experimental mRNA injections, I think that's on the low side. I really do. And the other thing is, it's not over, because some people that got vaccinated 2 years ago are getting myocarditis now. Like, sometimes it takes a long time for enough spike protein to build up, or the person's more resilient, or where they got injected and how it traveled. But there's a lot of people that are in the woods. And again, these people that had heart problems that got denied by their doctors. One of my friends, for 1.5 years, the doctor was denying it. And he finally said, "Yeah, you're definitely vaccine injured, and that's why you have myocarditis." So he has medication to keep his blood pressure and his heart rate in the normal range. But I don't like saying it, but statistically, there's a 50-50 chance that he's going to be dead within 5 years of getting myocarditis. So 2 has passed. So, in 3 years, there's a 50-50 chance he's dead. He's a young, healthy man, with children and a family and stuff. And so, how many of him are there out there? And one little weird thing that I haven't heard anybody else say, but I do recall when they were introducing these things, they said that these concoctions had to be stored at minus 72 degrees Celsius. And then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, we don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah,
there was no change. There was no change. So it is my hope, again, because I know a lot of pro-vaxxers hate me and would like me dead, like the surgeon who died up in New Brunswick in his sleep after his third. He said he'd like to punch anti-vaxxers in the face. I'm a proud anti-vaxxer, by the way, and I'm not just against this one. I'm against all of them. And I don't care. I have the science to back me up. But the fact of the matter is that, there's, this mRNA technology, we really don't fully understand how bad it was. But I think the saving grace might be that where they stopped, they logistically could not store these things in pharmacies and at clinics and at schools and at guest homes. They gave them out everywhere. And here's another interesting thing that I brought up on Laura Lynn's show, is that, sorry to be a hog, but it was the last thing I'll say on this. So they stopped doing the minus 72. So that might be a saving grace, that some of my friends that are jabbed, maybe these things were inert and didn't work. That's one thing. But the other thing that a lot of people don't know that I discovered because I'm friends with two doctors. I sail with one, and one's my buddy's friend brother. So in Nova Scotia, and I think almost every province, medical doctors were not allowed to give COVID injections. Okay. Now, medical doctors prior to COVID could give you a flu, could give you your baby vaccines. In fact, they gave most of them. All of a sudden, this comes along, and I know what their excuse would be. Oh, we had to give too many, and the doctors couldn't handle it all. They would not allow doctors to give COVID vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I'll tell you why. Because when your doctor does something with you, there's a mountain of law of patient-doctor confidentiality and privilege. And that's what Paul Westhaver invoked on the stand the other day, bringing it back to this case. He said, when somebody asked him, he said, that's none of your business. And if you ask me again, I'll sue you. Right? So what happened is they took the COVID vaccines out of the hands of the doctors. This is another showing of intent. And they only let pharm techs, pharmacists, nurses inject people, right? Because then it's done in a public clinic, all this stuff, and it's not covered under doctor-patient privilege. And
good point.
Yeah.
And Paul, he did a great job too, because they were trying to paint him as some kind of an anti-vaxxer, and he said, I'm pro-vax, and they asked, are you vaccinated? And he was like, that is private and personal medical information, so don't ask me that. And of course, it's not material, I don't think, to the question of whether the process was abused in this case. So he was quite
but you know what? Do you know what is salient to the process being abused? That Crown prosecutor then said, could you give me the name of the last people you worked with in the States? Can you give me the name of your supervisor? She's basically badgering him to try to make him feel afraid for his job and his livelihood. I was incensed at that. I couldn't believe that that Jeremy's lawyer didn't object, but I think maybe he'll use that in his closing arguments. And again, not every single person picks up on everything. I'm sure I missed a ton at the trial. And
you didn't miss that though, Glennie. I agree with you on that, Glennie. That was an intimidation thing. They wanted to know who can we call and confirm. It's the bottom line. We're going to start calling your employers and make as much trouble for you as we can. Yeah, but they're barking up the wrong tree, because although Paul Westhaver is a patent holding, and again, most of the engineering he's done is in medical technology devices. Of the 22 patents he has, it's mostly in medical tech. But Paul Westhaver is one of those guys. Fear might last for him in a couple of seconds when he gets frightened, but that fear turns into anger and rage pretty darn quick. And it's a controlled focus, anger and rage. The government of Nova Scotia does not want to truly make Paul Westhaver afraid, because they'll unleash something that they don't want. And I'm not talking anything violent or anything else, right? This guy can research, put arguments together, and he's not afraid. He's kind of, I don't know what his net worth is, and I don't really care. But if he took it upon himself to say, I'm going to get Jeremy's lawyer or somebody that's higher up than him, somebody from Gowlings up in Ottawa or something, and I'm going to crucify them. Well, he can't get Gowlings because here's something I learned. The Nova Scotia government has the #1 law firm that gives lawyers to become Supreme Court justice, Gowlings. If you have a case against the province of Nova Scotia, Gowlings is on retainer to defend them. Nothing surprises me anymore, Glennie. No, I found that out. Yeah, I found that out.
Yeah, not after the last few years. And I thought he did a pretty good job. Like, they were kind of questioning his sincerity with respect to being afraid, and what he had said. Oh, somebody ringing there.
Peter's here.
Yeah. Well, sorry, guys.
Well, he made some really good points on the stand, because he was talking about being afraid when he went out to the protest. Like, he went down there because he was afraid that something was going to happen, that they were going to be persecuted in some way. And they asked him why that was, and he said because of what he saw happen at the trucker convoy, and also what had happened over the last several years. And you guys kind of touched on something there, where we're talking about this element of coercion, the state coercion with respect to taking the injections. And I mean, that's what we mean when we say a free society, is that we mean it is free of coercion. So that's how far we've regressed really is all the way back to like pre-Roman era, where the coercion is. It's not a free choice when you're coerced into doing it. And we had our own prime minister saying, there's going to be consequences for these choices. So ergo, they are not free choices. And Paul was talking a little bit on the stand about how he feared for Morgan and Jeremy's safety. And that's why he went down there, was to bear witness to all of this. And they were questioning him. This is another one of those things where it's just like the level of obliviousness and the total lack of self-awareness is really galling, because some of the theme that we saw, I think, through multiple witnesses, Strang and Paul, for example, was this element of fear on the part of Strang, or a fear on the part of the citizens. And so they were questioning, like, the violence, I think, was the word that they were using. I think the more appropriate word would be coercion, but he was fearful of the police. And they're like, well, why would you be fearful of the police? And he said, well, because they've been acting like absolute tyrants, especially when it came to the convoy. They have guns. There were more of them than there were of us, and they have their guns. So they can coerce us into doing anything. And then they asked him, as they had asked Strang previously, don't you think that that Strang might have had similar fears with respect to people gathering outside his home? And he was like, well, absolutely not, because they didn't have guns. They don't have the full weight of the state behind them. They don't have all these powers at their disposal. They're just average citizens, and they're outnumbered by police who are armed. So this play victim kind of thing. Glenn, I think you were talking about something like this. You and I were talking about it earlier today. It's the gaslighting technique, right?
Yeah. I just read this morning. It's an acronym, and it's basic logic when you really think of it. But it's nice when somebody can give you a little mnemonic device like an acronym. So the acronym is DERVO, and it says, when you accuse an evil person of something, when you call them out, accuse them, whatever, prove it even, the first action is they deny, then they attack you, right? And then they reverse the victim and offender. So in this particular case, Strang is, he denies that masking children was a bad thing. He denies that proving injections for 6 months old, which it just horrifies me. He denies that he did anything wrong, but objective science will prove over time. It's already proven. It's just a matter. The objective science will eventually be accepted that everything that Dr. Strang did was wrong and had no factual basis, even when he did it. What Dr. Strang had was a belief, and it may have even been an earnest belief, which makes him slightly less culpable, right? But they did the deny thing. Then they did the attack. Media, everybody working in unison, government, media, police. He's a white supremacist. That's the attacking. And then they reverse the thing, and that's what they're trying to do. Like, when Dr. Strang knows that he can call the Premier's office directly, he can call the Premier's personal private cell phone. He can call the personal private cell phone of police, I'm sure. So they reversed the victim offender thing, and switching gears, but making a very good parallel, was the exact same thing was used by Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. They denied they were doing anything wrong. What do you mean? Like, we're just here for safety, and it's all about safety and protecting Canadians, right? And then the truckers roll in, and the numbers were so big, he called them a fringe minority with unacceptable views. Well, I don't think they were fringe when you see the size of them. And by the way, I've never seen any Canadian initiative ever raise something like $6 million in 48 hours. What did the government have to do? They had to seize that. They had to seize that because they can't be opposed. So, and people who gave money to the truckers' convoys, Chrystia Freeland smirked, went to the mic, said, yes, we've seized Canadians' bank accounts, and we're going to seize more, right? So they denied they're doing anything wrong. Then they attack them, and they reverse the role. Like, there's Trudeau, the people that would follow him or believe him or be woke or whatever. Oh, my God, Trudeau has to hide out at his at his cottage. If people in Canada, with the veterans and the active military and police that hate Trudeau, if they want to do something to him, they'd have got to him a long time ago. They wanted to publicly go protest, right? and have their grievances looked at. And Trudeau said, I'll listen to people. He said this to CBC. Yes, I'll listen to Black Lives Matter. I'll listen to all kinds of protesters, but I'm not listening to these protesters. All he had to do was take Tamara Lich, Marazzo, a couple other people into a room and say, what is your grievances? He could have actually been a hero. Trudeau could have been a hero if he listened to them and he had said, okay, what are your grievances, this and that, hash it out and say, you know what, I'm going to put a commission and you people will be on it. And he could even stack the deck and put 9 of his and 3 of them or something. But he at least could have paid lip service to the fact that people were justly upset that their movements were restriction, justly upset that their kids couldn't play sports. There's one little hockey player in Canada, 12-year-old boy. He's now dead, one of that I know of. I'm sure there's dozens other. And people can't go to work. I got friends of mine that knew these were dangerous, right? One friend of mine told me if something happens to me, I told my wife to call you to get me to try to do something about it. And I'm like, what can I do? I make a Facebook post. And again, 80% of the people in Canada that are believers, right, are just going to say, well, there's Glenn going on with his conspiracies again. You know, and like childhood vaccine injuries. They say you're a conspiracy theorist for saying there's childhood. It's on the package insert listed as a side effect, and it does not put a number on the probability of it. Every single childhood vaccine says fever, brain swelling. They call it encephalitis, hoping that people won't notice the brain swelling. But no parent is ever given a vaccine insert, right? So anyways, back to Ottawa and how they handled that. They just reversed the victim offender thing, and people play victim. Generally, have a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, well, you know, he's playing victim. He must be a victim." They don't see it as playing. But I mean, it behooves me of how low your social acumen has to be to not see Trudeau for the phony person he is. I had a little tiny business dealing with somebody one day that told me that Justin Trudeau is the best prime minister we ever had. He's incredibly articulate. And when he said he's incredibly articulate, I'm like, I bastardized the English language. I've got a huge Cape Breton accent. I know I'm not a well-spoken person, but my content is good enough that I'll allow myself to come on a show like this. But he's telling me that Justin Trudeau is articulate? How delusional they have to be to make that assessment.
Relative to the rest of people kind?
Yeah. No, and that's another thing too. I say this as well. If you want to be able to get your message out, I think it was John Lennon said it, because he was into a lot of protesting and stuff like that. You can agree and disagree with some of his positions, but he said, when you're fighting corruption and tyranny, be very careful you don't lose your sense of humor, right? And because you really do. Like Tucker Carlson said it out in Alberta. You know, you have to mock these people. They're worthy of being mocked. And there's a guy who's making great change. He's over trying to have peace with Russia right now. Going to interview Putin today if he hasn't already. And, you know, basically it's great advice, right? Still have a party, right? Like somebody said something about if you were afraid and it's not, why were you laughing to Morgan? And you're like, yeah, there's something called gallows humor for one. And the other thing is, you know, if you don't want to cry, laugh, you know?
Penny's making an excellent point there, guys. I'd like to add a little something to that, because what you're saying is, because Jeremy is a comedian and he's mocking government. Tucker Carlson pointed this out west. He said they will absolutely hate you for doing that. Yeah, that man has been labeled for them as public enemy number one, because he uses humor to talk about how the level of insanity that both our provincial and municipal and federal governments have attained. My son refers to it as peak political corruption. He said they've attained something that's called peak corruption. And right now we have problems inside the judiciary. Everybody seems to forget that, like I talked about, the last bastion of freedom in Canada that are supposed to keep things aligned are the RCMP. And the RCMP followed the legal orders when they were beating peaceful protesters in Ottawa. These are the guys who are supposed to be dragging the politicians into court and dealing with this stuff. It's not supposed to be Jeremy MacKenzie in court. It's not supposed to be Morgan May.
Peter, I have a question for you and Jeff. And the question is this, is that I recall near the end of the truckers' protests, there was guys in military uniforms with no name tags. And some people suggested they were like, what's the deal with that? Is that allowed in Canada for action against citizens?
I'm pretty sure that they were just like basically SWAT from northern Quebec. That's the best working theory that I'm able to find anyway. They probably didn't speak French or English very well.
So
People
SWAT's allowed to not. So SWAT's allowed to not identify themselves.
Well, no, that's not the case, but I wouldn't say that they were military. And some people have been speculating that they were like UN troops, but the UN doesn't have a military. They have to get the US to do all their fighting for them, essentially. So
it'd be a good pop, guys.
Yeah, if you could get anything, I've
You
been
get 2
submitting
pages
some
of
points
black,
related to
all redacted.
Yeah, I've been relating some putting some access to information requests in related to my request, and good luck getting anywhere with that, or my arrest in Ottawa, and good luck getting anywhere with that. It's like I can't even get the recorded phone call with duty counsel out of them, for that matter. So it seems those records just don't exist.
So, gentlemen, based on what you guys saw in court Friday and what I told you that I had seen the 2 previous days, or that we saw on Thursday and Friday, what's your summation in regards to the criminal charges that are laid against both Jeremy and Morgan? Because I didn't see any evidence at all. I didn't see any evidence to support what was the actual charge again? Criminal harassment. I didn't see any justification or evidence to even support harassment, let alone criminal harassment.
But we're not into the trial. We're into a separate thing as a motion to stay.
That's correct.
And
but
that's
even
why.
So.
Oh, but
they still have to have justification.
I think the motion to stay. Yeah, I think the motion to stay has merit. They're supposed to be in court yesterday, today, whatever. I imagine it's canceled with the weather. I don't know if it is, but I would assume that court would have been canceled. I think you guys got 70 or 80. We got 160 down here, centimeters. But my opinion is I can't speak to the hearing because I don't know what evidence the prosecution is going to put forth and whatever. But to this motion so far, I think that Jeremy's lawyer is making a darn good case that there was abuse of process. So I think the motion, right. Yeah. Like, and again, I can't see too much changing because they kind of got the most important ones out there, I think. Unless he's saving something for a ta-da moment, and maybe he is, the lawyer and Jeremy or whatever. But I think that, put it this way, I could see it going either way, because often if there's, it's like when there's a championship match, they always give the advantage to the defending champ. And many lawyers, one was our mayor here in CBRM, he got taken to task. He once said to CBC, when a smaller entity like the municipality is taking on the Nova Scotian government, the judiciary generally sides with the bigger party. So I think if it's gray at the end, if there's any gray, whether or not there was abuse of process, then the judge will side with the Crown. But from what I've seen right now, unless something drastically changes, I think that they've got a great case for dismissal on, and that's not hopeism or the fact that I like them. That's my objective opinion. I think that they have a great case for what the evidence that was presented, and that we've already spoke to. I don't want to reiterate it because we've gone along now already, but I think they have a great case. What do you think, Jeff?
I personally think that it was pretty good. The question, I guess, is whether they actually met the threshold of evidence for the abusive process. And there may be enough plausible deniability in there for them to avoid that, for them to avoid having the charges stayed and to proceed with the trial itself. But when it comes to the trial itself, I mean, more evidence is going to come out. Like, and it's like you said when we started this out, Glenn, like the thing is with the motion, the burden of proof is on Jeremy and Morgan to demonstrate that abusive process took place. But when it comes to the criminal charges of harassment, then the burden of proof shifts over to, because they're the ones making the accusation now, but when they go to trial, they're going to be the accused. So then it's on the province to prove that the criminal harassment took place. I don't think that they're going to get that. And I think you're right when you say that it would be a big mistake for them to even go for it, because even more is going to come out, and they're going to look, they're going to look even worse. And I'm just looking now at the criminal law notebook here on general principles of abusive process by law enforcement. And, you know, I think it's probably muddy enough that it's going to come down to a judgment call. And that's why we have judges, of course. And it would have to be, I would think, a pretty high bar for her to make that determination. So I'm a bit skeptical when it comes to their prospects of success in getting the stay that they're moving for right now. But I came away with like this like high sense of optimism that there's just no way they're going to get the conviction on the criminal harassment.
Yeah. You know what else too is interesting when you say how they're going to appear right now, there's pretty much a media blackout. I'm not seeing anything on mainstream about this. I didn't see any mainstream reporters there, not seeing anything. Right. Now, what'll happen is we know this from other cases. What'll happen is they'll make like this doesn't exist. And if the government looks horrible, the media won't say a thing about it. It'll just fade away. But if they get a conviction, it'll be national news. And I'll say that again, national news, not just some guy in Nova Scotia. It'll be Jeremy MacKenzie, King of Diagolon, King of the white supremacists in Canada, convicted as he should be. You know, that's what'll happen. So right now there's a media blackout in a case involving the father of Nova Scotia. So that doesn't even fit. Think about it. The father of Nova Scotia had something happen on the street outside of his, but the media just doesn't care. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, very interesting. There's all kinds of shady stuff going on here. And you know that it will be the case that, like you said, if they do end up getting the charges to stick, then it's going to be, I'm going to say, the leader of the Diagolon, because that's how CTV reports on it, is they call it the Diagolon.
The Diagolon.
What is the Diagolon and what do they want? Yeah, well, they're an accelerationist group that wants to stoke a civil war, apparently. But as we saw with, some of the information that came out, I think it was at the emergency measures inquiry where some of the emails back and forth between RCMP were like, the Diagolon doesn't even meet the definition of a group, let alone, a radical accelerationist far right militant group or anything like that. It's not even a group. It's a podcast following at the end of the day. So, but I do agree that they're going to try and spin it like that.
I am guilty of watching a lot of his podcasts from start to finish because I need the humor in my political, I need the political satire, because if I just sit and look at what I know other people are doing and how other people are living it and they're angry all the time, like Ezra Levant and the guys at Rebel, they do some good work. There's zero humor, right? So after watching that, you can't take any away. But when you get a political satirist like Jeremy, you get the truth. He had me looking at things I didn't like. There was a podcaster out in Saskatchewan. His name is Quick Dick McDick, and he's always making fun of the Liberal government. Always making fun of him. He's doing a great job. He's hilarious. He's got a big following, way bigger than Jeremy. And by watching Jeremy the other night, I found out that he pushed the jab and made a video of him going and getting the jab. He's a farmer. He's a farmer, but he's a social influencer. And he's using his social influence. And Jeremy just ripped him. Like, how is he going to feel when people he knows gets marketitis? Maybe some of his family members. Are you going to give some of that money back? Because he makes a lot of money from his podcasting and stuff, right? So it's interesting. He, Quick Dick McDick, is hilarious podcaster on, the carbon tax, on what they're doing with farmers. He's great in a lot of things, but he really went up. And again, if it wasn't for listening to Jeremy, I wouldn't have learned that. You know what I mean? So there's various different pieces of the puzzle of what's going on in Canada politically that you can only get from a satirist, because we know mainstream won't report it,
Yeah, he's a trench warrior, Jeremy. He's right down in the trenches, like all over all these different aspects of the grassroots that I can't stay on top of myself. So somebody needs to do it. So I think he's doing a real service to Canada, continued service to Canada.
Yeah, a commenter just made that. That's also something Jeremy brought up. Quick Dick McDick took COVID money, right? Because there was all kinds of social influence. Like when it was going on, people couldn't even fathom that. And if they heard it, they think it's good. But now in hindsight, we look back, there was billions of dollars paid to social influencers. Well, look at I don't know a single song she sings, but apparently in female vocalists in the United States right now, nothing tops Taylor Swift, and she's with her
Pushing the
boyfriend.
jab.
Yeah, her boyfriend. Yeah, she pushes the jab, and she's an airhead, but she's a sing-song girl. Let her sing songs. Beauty. Don't talk to people with science. You're an idiot. But her idiot athlete boyfriend just took $20 million from Pfizer to push the jabs that have a 6%. So Pfizer's looking at the numbers. They've got 6% uptake in their latest COVID scam. And so what do? Well, we'll just pay some football guy and everybody watches football and he'll influence people. We'll get our 20 million back in sales.
Yeah. Sports ball, as Jeremy's always putting it.
Yeah.
And here is an article here from CTV. And it says, what is the Diagolon extremist group and what does it want? So that's the kind of spin that we can expect that they'll try to put on anything coming out of this, especially if they get a guilty verdict with respect to the criminal harassment charges. But several problems with this, like the term extremist, they've really stretched that to the limit in recent years, because extremism, and I'm speaking like from a military background too. I mean, I had to do my top secret special access clearance and stuff like that. And this is something that, you have to know. An extremist implies that they're willing to use political violence, or that they do use violence for the purposes of achieving their political aims. But in what's happened in recent years is that they've taken that term, and if they mean like far right, if you're on the extreme end of the spectrum, not that you're extremist in the violent sense, they start putting this extremist in there all the time in order to stoke fear and stigmatize these people, people like us.
Yeah. Can I add something that I think is really important? Sure. Because we all pay attention to U.S. politics. Joe Biden has on several occasions in front of crowds broadcasted all over the world, says the number one threat in America is white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Go look at the FBI and local police forces crime statistics and find out how many crimes are does white supremacy exist? Mostly in jails where certain color groups and certain ethnic groups and certain groups, there's probably is some white supremacy going on in jails. But on a large scale outside of that, it's laughable if it wasn't so serious, because the wokes and the lefts and the university educated kids, they're going around thinking this is real. But the president said it, that the number one threat, he wouldn't just outrightly lie. Yeah, kids, he would. And he does on a daily basis, if he can even remember what the damn thing he's saying, right? If he can even remember what he's saying, but he's lying constantly. But I mean, I don't think I've heard a lot of ridiculous things, for shame me once with what was his name?
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush, shame me once. He couldn't keep that straight.
It's fool me once.
Shame on
me, or shame on you. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice.
You know the thing.
Get fooled again.
Never get fooled again. That's
the
it.
thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. God is the thing. Yeah, he's a believer in God. Everything's Biden's a good Christian.
Biden.
We're endowed with the thing.
Yeah.
Guys, I'd like to point something else here. I'd like to point something else before people sign off, is that I don't know how many people realize that Jeremy's just not a veteran. He's a decorated combat veteran.
Yeah.
Who's being severely screwed over by the system.
Yeah.
That man has earned the right to speak up against government tyranny. Mm-hmm. A lot of us, we all have that inherent right, but this man, right, has put his friends in plastic bags.
Yeah.
Right. This guy has earned the right to speak up and be listened to. Yeah. And when a politician who has earned no right to do anything other than to bleed our system through both pensions and be jammed sideways in the trough, I guess if you got to pick a side, who are you going to side with? You're going to get side with the guy who's willing to put his life on the line for the country, or the guy jammed sideways in the trough, trying to get as much as he can out of me and you, the taxpayer.
Yeah.
Right.
I spoke to you and Jeff about how Conrad Black hijacked Tucker Carlson's event at the end and said, I'm going to give the last word to Jordan Peterson, which I just found disgusting. But I'll make a suggestion, Jeff, maybe near the end or now, people want to get an idea. Lots of people are turning in know who Jeremy is, but the odd person that might be bumping across this podcast, I think you might want to give the last word to Jeremy today in that, and I'm just suggesting it, you don't have to, but play that clip again, because and the longer clip is even better, where he basically says, Omar Khadr and his buddies were terrorists, right? And he and in the longer clip, he said a lot more. But I'll be honest with you, after watching that, it inspired me that yes, there is courage out there. There are people with courage that will speak up and not cower. Because I'm telling you, I would, if I'm going to throw a number at it, high 90% of people in Canada, right, will cower being called a racist.
Oh yeah,
right?
that is the purpose of it too.
They will cower, right?
Yeah.
I now be honest, I didn't cower so much, but when I did something in 2012, it's a long story, I don't want to get into it, but I had a little bit of public attention, and people were calling me, what's the word? Because I was critical of some aspects, they were calling me a homophobe, right? And it did bother me because, like I said, I was friends with, I knew some homosexual people. I didn't hate them, whatever. But when they start painting you and people start saying it, it gets believed. But
well, and what I say is to lean into it. Whenever they're calling you something like that, just like if they're calling you a racist, make a racist joke. Lean into it.
You know what I do? I always say I'm racist. I make fun of it by saying, you know what? I am racist. I'm racist against oranges. Because it makes about as much sense as what they're saying, right? I'm racist against 4-cylinder cars.
Yeah,
don't like
and one detail I wanted to throw in there too, guys, which you were saying about Jeremy being a decorated combat veteran of this country and all that. I mean, well, first of all, if he can't speak truth to power, then none of us can.
Yeah.
Just on that basis. So that's why we need to continue to support this guy. And also, he's not just a decorated combat veteran. He's a combat wounded veteran. He's one of about 1,000 living Canadians who actually has a sacrifice medal. That's the medal you get for being wounded in action. So he's literally bled for this country, literally. I mean, like, if he can't say whatever the hell he wants, then who can? Right?
Yeah.
None of us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Guys, I think that's a good call there, Glenn. I'm going to throw to
I
the
love
last
this.
word to Jeremy here.
Jeff, later on, I'm going to send you the original so you'll have it for future use.
Yeah.
All right. That sounds perfect, brother. Appreciate it. And
thanks a lot, gentlemen. Let's hear this man speak.
Yep.
Let's hear this man speak.
Yeah, here we go.
My name's Jeremy MacKenzie. I'm a Canadian Forces Afghanistan combat veteran. I deployed with 2nd Battalion Royal Canadian Regiment in 2007 to fight these people. These are not people that wear uniforms. These are not people that obey things like the rules of war or the Geneva Conventions. They use women and children as human shields. They're horrendous. They're monstrous human beings. They didn't care. They would blow up as many of their own civilians as they would do us. It didn't matter at all. And I have to be here to say this because many of the people from my platoon that were killed aren't here to say that anymore. They're all dead. Chris Stanix isn't here anymore. Sergeant Donnie Lucas isn't here anymore. I'm sick of staying home and staying on the couch and watching everybody just not say anything because this is wrong. This is not what Canada stands for. It's not the country that I signed up to fight for, and it is certainly not the country that those men and women died for. So I guess I'm the bad guy now. If that's how it's going to be, then that's how it's going to be. My name's Jeremy MacKenzie. I'm a Canadian Forces Afghanistan.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll issue a warning to the Canadian government, and I'll issue a warning to the Nova Scotia government. Keep attacking that man. Keep attacking him. Go ahead. Keep attacking him because you're just going to make him bigger, and he's just going to resonate. And so go ahead. Keep attacking him. Keep dragging him into court and all that stuff. He's not going to crack. If he was going to crack, he'd have cracked long ago, right? He's going to endure this. He's got a lot of support now from tens of thousands of people who support his podcast, both by watching and sharing and giving money. So go ahead, Nova Scotia government bureaucracy. And again, lots of friends of mine work for the government. I was a public servant as a high school teacher. I'm not some anarchist. But for the people that like throwing their weight around, abusing the power and abusing processes, go ahead, keep attacking him. See what happens.
Guys, can I add one more in regards to that? And that's and that's if this goes to trial, I'm going to be in the front row when Paul Westhaver starts revealing the poi pops that he has.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to tell you one thing: you want to poke a hornet's nest, you go poke a hornet's nest and see what comes out of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And And yeah, I'll echo what Glenn said there. Like Jeremy's already been to hell and back. What the heck are these guys going to throw at him?
Big time.
They think they're going to break him. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah.
And one other thing I just wanted to touch on before we left off, there was something that Paul mentioned just for everybody's situational awareness about, and because you just mentioned how Paul was, they're poking the bear with that one too, but didn't they send some cars? He was very suspicious that some cars that were parked outside his house for a very long period of time were in fact police cars. Like they were having a conversation, and this was like the same day, or it was like the day after the arrest, but it was the same day that they passed the Strang Act, first, second, and third reading, and now you're not allowed to protest.
Here's a statement for you. Yeah, here's a soundbite on that one. If they're gonna attack Paul Westhaver, put it this way, they would have to be incredibly stupid. The government they'd have to be incredibly stupid to go after Paul Westhaver. And you know what? I still think they might. Go ahead. I want front row to that one.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not accusing them of being smart. There's no.
You know what though? There's some people there that their ego is just too big to back away.
Yeah.
And you know what? They'll be the first ones that go under, because I've seen the data, guys, and I can't wait for it to happen. I don't want to see it happen because it'll extend things for Jeremy and Morgan. But if it does happen, it's going to be, I'll go back to that term, catastrophic for the province.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. I mean, we can only hope.
You got her.
I do kind of hope they end up stepping in it like this. Yeah, they definitely are poking the bear here. So, and they have been for a while. So it's about time that they got some comeuppance. And if they're going to get it, I think it's going to be in criminal court. Okay, guys. So, and Rick, Sandy Sillis is saying, hoping that Jeremy prevails. And just before we sign off here, I'm going to vector you guys onto the Veterans for Freedom website. You can subscribe to our newsletter here, join Veterans for Freedom if you're a veteran here, and support the Veterans for Freedom here by clicking support. You can donate to us to help us keep the lights on, pay for my StreamYard account by clicking donate, or you can click support to go to the support fund page. This is something we're really proud of around here. Everybody who donates gets a chance to vote on where the pool of donations goes every month. This month we have Chris Lysak up, who needs no introduction. This isn't even the first time that we've raised funds for Chris's legal defense. He's one of the Coots Four who's been jailed without bail since prior to the crackdown in Ottawa. So we're coming up on the 2-year mark here now. We're well over 700 days. And we have Kayla Pollock here. She's trying to get her story out, and she's the Canadian Independence. Kayla's getting her story out by partially funding the Canadian Independence costs to do a full video coverage of her story. She became a quadriplegic after her COVID-19 booster shot. So another worthy cause there. And Lisa Robinson is up again this month, and she's the Pickering City Council member who, on top of defaming her, the council has sanctioned her 90 days wages, and she is a single mother, so that definitely makes life hard for her. And you'll also have the option to send 10% of your donation to the Veterans Association Food Bank, and they are dedicated to supporting and enriching the lives of veterans and their families. So all kinds of worthy causes there as usual, folks. And if you didn't catch Drew's sit rep on Sunday, go and check it out. He did a great job highlighting our successes. That's something that we need to do more often at Veterans for Freedom. We tend to be the quiet professionals and perhaps a little too modest for our own good, but we're going to be doing a lot of bragging moving forward, because I think we've had enough of everybody trying to smear us with all of these all this innuendo about where is the money going and stuff like that. So we're going to show you guys where the money's going. All right. That brings us all the way back to Plato. And no one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. And I think that that is an element in what's happening to Jeremy right now. Is the fact of the matter is they just hate him. Strang is up there calling him every name in the book. And that was one thing that I almost puked when I heard Strang saying that Jeremy was low character. He's talking about a decorated, combat wounded veteran of this country, and you have this morally bankrupt career bureaucrat who's been hiding out in our institutions and never really accepted any challenges in his life. calling Jeremy MacKenzie's character into question. It's just galling. It's just pretty disgusting. But I think that's it for us today there, guys. Unless you guys have anything else you want to add in there. I think Glenn's already signed off. Peter, I really appreciate you being with us, brother. And
yeah, no problem, Jeff. And I'm just going to hit that send button here. If you give me your email, I'll send you that full video right now, actually.
Yeah, I should have it on the ticker
now,
there.
but I can send it to your phone.
veteransforfreedom.ca.
Okay, just hang on here 1 second, and you will have it, Jeff. You'll have it sitting in your box here in just 2 seconds.
Awesome.
Anyways, yeah. So look, it's a shame that Paul didn't get out, but I appreciate being on. And so Jeff at say it again.
Veteransforfreedom.ca.
There it is. Well, I've got another one there for you too. It starts with an S.
Oh yeah, that's my private email.
Okay, so okay, all right.
I give my work email, my Veterans for Freedom email out on the podcast. And
okay, let's see.
But either one is fine. You can send it to either one, Peter.
All right, it's gone.
Right.
I believe that's it. You should have it, buddy. And if you don't get it, just let me know. All right, thanks, Kit. I appreciate the interview, buddy.
Yeah, and I appreciate your continued support to the fight to free Canada very much, Peter. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, you got it, bud. Thanks. Bye.
All right, take care. And for everybody who tuned in today, stay frosty and stay safe out there.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs.